guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, Helping Out Doesn't Mean Giving You $100,000. Disclaimer, all names below have been changed. This story occurs on my wife's side of the family, so I have a second row seat rather than a front row for most of this. My wife's Aunt Louise is a great lady. She and her husband lived in the San Francisco Bay Area and bought their home in the late 1970s. After her husband passed a few years ago, she sold her home for over $1 million and moved back to live closer to her family where she grew up, farming areas in Southern California. She's in her late 60s. Aunt Louise had 3 children, who are now all in their 40s. The 2 oldest are nice, normal people. Her youngest, Kay, is a real piece of work. She meets all the criteria for a psychological diagnosis of narcissism. This is just one of literally dozens of stories I could tell. First, some backstory about Kay's husband, Pedro. He was a good provider. About 10 years ago, things began going well and began making pretty good money. To Kay, however, higher income meant more spending, and soon she was buying a new car every 2 years. They went on cruises. She had all the latest and greatest gadgets. As the old MTV tagline used to go, too much is never enough. To augment her lifestyle, she would routinely run to her mom, Aunt Louise, with a sob story or another. We don't know the true figure, but I've heard rumors that Aunt Louise has given her more than $20,000 over the past few years. Kay and Pedro managed to keep their heads above water, but when COVID hit and the state of California ordered economic shutdown, money became tight. Then in October, the company went out of business. He found another job, but was essentially starting his career over. Naturally, they'd begun fighting about money, and 2 weeks ago it comes to a head. After hearing the blasphemous word "no" one time too many, Kay announces she's getting a divorce. Being Californian, she naturally expected the courts were going to give her one last payday from this poor guy, her car, their house, his 401k, and generous alimony. However, in her greed, she forgot that Pedro had kept draining his 401k to pay off credit cards. And all those papers about the house she was signing every couple of years was to refinance their house to pay off more credit cards, so there's almost no equity. And with having to start his career over, alimony wasn't going to be that great. So Kay does what she always does, goes running to her mother, Aunt Louise. Aunt Louise is naturally sympathetic and urges Kay to try and reconcile, but failing that, she might be able to help her out. Literally 2 hours later, Kay texts Aunt Louise with a photo of a pricey condo and asks for $100K to cover her down payment and costs to furnish it. Aunt Louise naturally pushes back, telling Kay that helping out didn't mean $100K. She had meant letting Kay live with her while she got back on her feet, writing a check for security deposit and first month's rent, and maybe helping with some car payments. At this point, Kay totally flips out. Here are the things my wife said were direct quotes. "I'm getting these third hand, so they might be slightly off. I can't believe my own mother would be so selfish. What difference does $100K make? You're not going to spend it all anyway," meaning before Aunt Louise dies. "Just sell some stocks or something." Aunt Louise fortunately does have someone who manages her money, but she stays on a strict allowance. After Aunt Louise held out, Kay has begun polluting Facebook with passive-aggressive messages about finding out people's true colors. My wife is actually hoping she calls to ask for help, specifically so she can let her have it with both barrels. Next one is titled, My Neighbor is a Jerk. At first, he seemed kind of okay. It all started when a car was parked in front of our house on the street for over a month. The tires went flat. His property line is about 4 ft past his driveway. Our driveways are in the front. This car that was parked there we have never seen before, and it was there for a long time. My wife did not want to knocking door to door, and really, neither did I, so she called the city. A notice gets put on the car to move it or it gets towed in 24 HRS. The neighbor pulls a different car from his driveway that rarely leaves and swaps the 2 cars. There is usually always a spot in his driveway that a car can fit, and he never has a car in front of his own house. When he was remodeling his house, he paid his buddies to do it for him, and they would only work on it after normal work hours. They would use Powertools past 10 p.m. on regular weekdays. I went outside at 10:45 p.m. and respectfully asked him to be quiet because my pregnant wife and I have work early. I went back to bed and could hear them talking and laughing about it. One Saturday morning at about 6:30 a.m., my whole family was woken up by a very loud alarm. I found a ghetto alarm speaker on the side of his house, and it was pointed at all of our bedrooms. His complaint about me is that I do my own vehicle maintenance in my driveway on nice weekend afternoons, bringing down property value. Next one is titled, Karen declares war on my parents for cutting a tree down on their own property. I, 25 male, have been living away from home ever since graduating from college. My parents both retired recently, and last summer they decided to use some of the money they'd saved up to finally build their dream retirement home in New Orleans, where they've been living for the past 10 years. I come from a very tight-knit family, so I still talk to my parents every week, and they were so excited when they said they'd already picked out the location where they wanted the house built. It was an empty lot in a nice neighborhood where a house had been demolished not long before due to age, and the previous owner, who was pretty wealthy and owned numerous properties around the city, decided that the lot was worth more without the house on it. Anyway, my parents snapped it up as soon as it came on the market. But not long after construction began, they realized that they were building their dream house right next door to the lair of a wild Karen. The trouble started when my parents had to cut down a large oak tree that sat in the front of the lot. It was a real beauty, too, one of those big southern live oaks, and although they didn't want to, they knew they had to remove it because it was in the way. No one likes to cut down a big, beautiful tree, and believe me, if there was a way to avoid doing it without impeding the construction, my parents would have taken it. So, they called a tree removal service, and the tree was soon gone. Well, a few days after the tree had been cut down, my dad was on the property talking to some of the construction guys and making sure everything was going smoothly. He was going back to his car when he saw a woman in her late 50s walk out of the house next door and head to her mailbox. My dad, let's call him John, is a pretty chill and laid-back guy who likes to be on good terms with everyone, so he walked over and introduced himself. "Hi," he said, holding out his hand. "My name's John and my wife and I are going to be your neighbors once our house is finished. I just wanted to come over and say hi and introduce myself. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" Karen glanced at the extended hand, then looked up at my dad and glared at him. "My name is none of your business," she snapped. "I'm not going to shake your hand because of COVID, and even if there was no COVID, I still wouldn't shake your hand because you people ruined my life when you cut down my tree. I still can't believe how selfish you are. You should both be ashamed of yourselves." My dad was taken aback by this and pointed out that Karen already had a nice big oak tree in her backyard, but Karen ignored him and stalked back inside her house. She never explained why she thought she was the owner of the tree that had been cut down, not once, and whenever my parents asked about it, she refused to answer. I guess it's just one of those things we'll never know, like what really happened to the lost Roanoke colony or the fate of D.B. Cooper. My parents met some of their other neighbors later that day, including a nice elderly couple who lived in the other house next door, Karen's, and when my dad told them what happened, the neighbors said Karen was like that to everyone and no one in the neighborhood liked her. They also said that Karen had been nasty to them for a long time, and they were in the process of selling their house because they couldn't stand living next door to her anymore. Karen soon began living up to her reputation. For months, whenever my parents would visit the house to see how the construction was coming along, she'd find something to complain or confront them about. One time she said the construction workers were being too loud and threatened to call the police, even though it was the middle of the day. Another time she said that the construction company was using illegal immigrants as cheap labor and threatened to call ICE and have the whole project shut down. My dad mentioned this to the owner of the company, and the owner sent Karen a formal letter threatening a lawsuit if she tried. I don't know if there were any actual grounds for a lawsuit, but the threat must have worked because ICE never showed up. Oh, and then there was the time she tried to have my parents' car towed for illegal parking when they parked by the curb of their still unfinished house. The first my parents knew about this was when the tow truck showed up, but the driver took one look at where my parents' car was parked and told Karen he'd send her a bill for wasting his time if she called him again. I could go on. Karen did everything she could think of trying to interfere. She was absolutely relentless in her crusade to avenge a tree she never even owned. Happily, the house was completed despite her best efforts, and my parents finally moved in not long after the holidays. My mom told me later that she caught Karen watching them bitterly from her window as they were taking some of their boxes inside. She was concerned that Karen might keep going and try something else. But I guess Karen was too busy wallowing in self-pity over her failure or something, because things were actually quiet for a while. But a few weeks ago, things changed. New Orleans has had some really bad weather lately due to the winter storms that are battering much of the southern U.S. right now. And one night, one of those storms was so powerful that it knocked over the tree in Karen's backyard. It missed falling out of her house. According to my folks, Karen didn't discover what happened until the following morning. When she came outside and saw the pile of scrap metal that used to be her car, she threw back her head and let out a primal scream like something out of The Exorcist. She had to pay a tree removal service to get rid of the tree, and then she had to pay for a tow truck to get rid of the car too, and then she had to get a rental car too. Karen put her property up for sale and moved out not long afterward. Everyone in the neighborhood was glad to see her go, and my parents enjoyed watching her drive off into the sunset from the front porch of their amazing new house. Edit, for clarification, Karen did not sell her house right away. She put it on the market and moved out of it as soon as she could. I don't know where she is now, but I'm guessing she's staying somewhere else while she waits for someone to buy the property. I don't know if anyone has bought it yet, but since there's a pandemic going on, I think she'll be waiting for some time. Last one is titled. Entitled coworker tries to schedule meetings outside of contract time and criticizes my non-work plans. I have a coworker who is really disorganized and waits until the last minute to schedule things, and so that frequently means calling a meeting at 4:00 on a Friday. For reference, my 8-hour workday ends at 3:00, so these meetings make for 10 hours plus days, and because the coworker is so disorganized and unprepared, we frequently have to cover things that they should have done ahead of time, like creating an agenda or desired outcome at the actual meeting. Because these are required meetings, usually only once or twice a month, I have to go to them no matter when they're scheduled and get extended pay for working overtime, but my coworker is supposed to give at least a week's notice, and I'd definitely rather have the free time than the money. Typically, if I don't hear by Thursday afternoon that they have scheduled the meeting for 4:00 on a Friday, I make other weekend plans like hiking or bicycling or going out somewhere. Yesterday, Friday, the coworker attempted to schedule the meeting at 4:45 but didn't put it on my calendar until 3:05. I should have been off by then, but I had an end-of-day meeting that went over by a few minutes, so I was doing a last check of email and then shutting things down for the weekend. I saw the meeting request and responded that that wasn't enough notice for a meeting that far outside the workday, and that I normally would not have even seen the notice until the following Monday and CC'd my boss just so they knew I wasn't trying to shirk any duties. Of course, coworker is upset because they're required to hold a meeting by law, and it's the absolute last day to do it without filing an extension, which they've been told by my boss they're not allowed to do unless there's extenuating circumstances, and they've known about it for 2 months. They just didn't plan for it. My boss calls at 3:10 saying, "Can you please do this now?" and end at 4:10, and we will address it on Monday. Fine. I was planning on leaving town, but I can leave a little bit later. Coworker responds to my boss by email and says they're using personal time between 3:10 and 4:45, so they can't hold a meeting until then, and that nothing I'm doing could possibly be important enough that I can't attend the meeting at 4:45. Boss calls coworker. Coworker confessed that their child's birthday party is at 6 that evening and that they have to go try to find a cake and party supplies for the party before the meeting, which is why they can't be available. Boss gets annoyed and says that we, boss and I, will do the meeting now and coworker will have to answer for it on Monday. Boss and I hold meeting. It takes 20 minutes. I'm out of there by 3:45. Coworker sends me a Nastagram by text at 10:15 p.m. saying it's my fault they're in trouble, and that they have a child so I should understand that people with children come first, and that my activities/hobbies are pathetic, and it wouldn't have been that hard for me to just attend the meeting they scheduled, and that they'll have to go back and fix everything my boss, and I did incorrectly because they like to do it a specific way. My boss had already submitted it. I responded that I hope they enjoyed their child's birthday party and to have a good weekend. They respond that they forgot to invite people, so no one came, and thanks for rubbing that in their face. Thanks for listening.